And yet it's not human. That's
And
what you're
yet
gonna
it
say,
is
right?
not. I mean, there are some people who think now it's better than humans. Like this is another fringe thing happening in some of these tech hubs. But I think most of us can say, no, this is not a human.
This is Life and Faith, a podcast where we seek to elevate the conversation about the things that matter, or should matter, deeply human questions about meaning, purpose, and hope. No matter what you believe, we hope you'll join us exploring the complexities, the struggles, and the joys of life and faith. Welcome to Life and Faith from CPX. I'm Simon Smart. Well, how are you feeling about AI? And what kind of impact is it already having on your life? I think we're all experiencing this revolution with varying degrees of astonishment, perhaps excitement, and almost certainly some element of anxiety. I distinctly remember the first time someone showed me ChatGPT a couple of years ago and being absolutely blown away, and also thinking, this is the end of one era and the beginning of another. Everything since has confirmed that initial thought. Now, whatever benefits AI might deliver, they come with some serious concerns about the consequences of the technology. What will it mean for employment, community, and how we think of ourselves as human beings? What makes human life human? And what happens if we don't know how to answer that question? And what do the faith traditions, and particularly Christianity, have to contribute to this urgent discussion? Meghan Sullivan is my guest today to help us out with our thinking about these questions. She's a professor of philosophy at Notre Dame University in the US and also the founding director of Notre Dame's Institute for Ethics and the Common Good. Her institute recently received a very large grant to develop a faith-based approach to AI ethics. There are people who think there will be a vital role to play by Christian institutions in building strong ethical foundations to help us as societies grapple with this question. It was a thrill to have Professor Sullivan come into the CPX studio to talk about what concerns she has about AI, the ways it could go badly, but also why she's optimistic about a future with AI firmly in place. Meghan Sullivan, so good to have you here in Australia and in the studio here at CPX. Thanks for coming.
Oh my gosh, I'm so happy to be here.
Yeah, I want to talk to you about AI. Just how big a revolution does the arrival of AI into our lives represent? The speed and the scope of it's just mind-blowing, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. I was at the University of Notre Dame, Australia last night. We say it wrong, by the way, in the United States. I was at the University of Notre Dame, Australia.
That's not bad, yeah.
Last night. It feels so wrong. And one of the topics of conversation with the members of the public and the students was we hear so much about this idea of the singularity, this kind of moment when AI takes over the world, sort of Terminator style.
We're waiting for that, yep.
And that is hopefully a long way off or will never happen. But all of us, I think, have by now experienced what I call our personal singularity, this moment where we realize this technology has seriously disrupted some aspect of my life. Yeah. We're already here. In 2026, that event has happened.
Let's step back a little bit, because you hear different answers to this from people, but what would you say AI is? Like, what are we talking about?
When I'm talking about artificial intelligence, I'm talking about the very powerful models that a small number of companies in the United States, China, France, Australia are developing that are capable of computation that absolutely dwarfs any amount of computation a human mind is capable of solving problems and handling complex forms of data in ways that we don't even quite understand yet how it manipulates that data, but is able to produce outputs that we realize pass tests for creativity and problem solving that until a few years ago we thought only human minds were capable of. Yeah. So I want us to talk about very, very, very powerful forms of artificial intelligence that have, were items of science fiction until a few years ago and are now available on your cell phone.
Now, what do you think will be the biggest gains to come from AI? What are some of the things you're looking forward to in this enterprise?
I am absolutely looking forward to the day when artificial intelligence can take over many of the menial tasks that have nothing to do with our development or formation as human people and are just obnoxious. So
Right.
I think it's really exciting to realize, we now have this software on our phone that can be like the best executive assistant you could never afford.
Yeah.
At a more like higher level humanitarian sense, I think we're just in the first inning of seeing how artificial intelligence and machine intelligence can help with drug discovery and can help us identify cures and treatments for diseases that have been lethal throughout human history and are absolutely immiserating for the people who suffer them. Alzheimer's, various forms of cancer. We have this promise that we're about to make this big leap in our ability to discover and test new medicines, and I can't wait for that revolution to happen.
Right. So there's plenty that you can see on the horizon that you would consider positive. What are the things that trouble you the most?
I think in the near term, the biggest mistake that we have made with powerful artificial intelligence is giving it a human personality. I don't think we're talking enough about this yet, but I really think that we are going to look back in the 2020s and ask ourselves, why on earth did we allow these AIs to simulate human personalities, senses of humor? Why on earth did we develop and unleash these products that children could use that seem to emulate various forms of human interactions, but in fact do it in a really cheap and fake and distorting way? I think in the near term, that's a big problem. In the medium term, I am pretty fearful of this extremely powerful technology falling into the hands of political actors, economic actors who don't care about the common good, who don't care about human dignity, now have, it's a power enhancing technology, now have even more capacity to denigrate some of our most fundamental values.
And military use as well, is that something you wonder about?
Absolutely. I definitely believe in defense and believe that governments and people should have the capacity to defend themselves against attacks. And it's not like we've ever enjoyed a period of peace in world history. However, as you look around the world and you see democratic backsliding, you see people attaining political power that I don't think always have well-formed characters or have, again, the interests of humanity at the heart of what they're doing. And now they have access to this very, very powerful form of technology that's capable of helping them prosecute wars in new and more efficient ways, is capable of giving them the capacity to surveil their entire population. One of the things I think we sometimes forget with artificial intelligence is, its products are ubiquitous on our cell phones and computers now. But ultimately, it's a small number of companies in two big countries, the United States and China, that have the computer chips, that have the data centers, that have the equivalent of the nuclear energy of artificial intelligence. And the rest of us, civilians, people that don't live in the U.S. and China, are dependent upon the whims of these firms and these governments to decide how this is going to be used. And I don't think we're in this high trust world order right now where we think, well, gosh, I really want those two countries to dictate the rest of human civilization.
I heard Sam Altman say that we just got to kind of agree internationally. We just got to agree on some parameters around this stuff, which sounded spectacularly naive to me.
Yeah, I mean, the last time we faced a geopolitical puzzle of this scale was the 1940s and 50s with nuclear weapons. At that point, you have the U.S. and you've got Russia have access to these weapons now that could end human civilization as we know it. AI is not like a weapon like that explodes and kills people, but it is a very, very, very powerful tool that can be misused to the detriment of targeted populations. So, it's an imperfect analogy, but it's still a decent analogy in the sense that there's power that's concentrated in two places. At least in the Cold War, they were governments that were negotiating about this. Now it's not even so much that it's world governments that are engaged in statecraft with each other, but it's companies. It's major multinational companies, some of which hold the key to the next phase in our economic and social evolution, or it could, shut us down.
And the profit motive as opposed to a government's role feels less reassuring, doesn't it?
It feels less, I don't know. It's a mixed bag.
Well,
We're
it's
in
a mixed
uncharted
bag.
waters.
Sure.
But I think I speak for many of us when I feel quite anxious that there's a shocking lack of statecraft in the 2020s. And at least in the 40s and 50s, you had some pretty thoughtful, sophisticated leaders who were capable of navigating the really, really sticky situation of the Cold War. And I look around now and I think we've got to raise up a generation of leaders who are capable of doing this.
I think you're not alone in feeling like that. What about people who have formed intimate, close bonds with an AI chatbot? Like, are there any upsides to that? There are plenty of, I imagine, downsides. But I've even heard that there are studies that claim when you're discussing a personal or sensitive matter, an AI bot is better to talk to than a human being because they're less judgy, they're more compassionate, they're not awkward. What do you make of all of this?
The biggest cultural mistake we are making with artificial intelligence right now is that we gave it human personalities or the ability to simulate human personalities. I think we are not speaking enough about how dangerous that development is. And we did not have to develop AIs that way. Like, there's a version of these products where they really behave more like tools, where you use them to search out information, you use them to handle coding or data applications, but they do not pretend to have human virtue or human personalities. Maybe in edge cases, maybe for neurodivergent individuals who need to practice social skills with kind of a willing, tolerant partner, maybe in these real edge cases, it can be helpful to practice sociality with artificial intelligence. But in the vast majority of cases, the fact that we have implanted this technology with these fake personalities is leading to loneliness. It's leading to badly formed habits around our ability to socialize with one another. It's accelerating many of the social ills that we developed in the era of the internet and social media. And 25 years in, we realize are already really bad. It's just put those on amphetamines. I feel like I'm on the far end of that has been a huge mistake. And we've really got to find ways to put that genie back in the bottle.
Now, the amount and the speed of this change is the thing that would prompt you to say we need careful ethical consideration around this stuff. What's it like for you then as you try to get some traction with people? Are you finding people are responding to this? They do feel the need for it?
I was blown away earlier this week, and I'd come down to Sydney, and we hosted an event downtown where we gathered people to talk about what dignity, embodiment, love, and transcendence and agency feel like in the era of powerful artificial intelligence. And I wasn't quite sure, I'm not in Australia very much. I wasn't quite sure who's going to come to listen to this kind of idealistic professor from America talk about what it means to live a good life in the era of AI. I was blown away. It was a packed house, even though it was pouring buckets.
I apologize for that.
Oh, yeah. Well, yeah. Sydney's not lived up to my beach dream expectations so far.
We're feeling bad about that.
But there was so much optimism in the room. And if I had to characterize the feeling, and this has been true in the events that I've done in the United States as well, I think there are plenty of people who think, I'm so grateful that I get to be alive when this great scientific discovery was made. I mean, we got to be here on planet Earth when this huge leap forward in machine learning was discovered. That is pretty cool. And sure, now we're facing this really, really interesting puzzle about how we're going to use this discovery to promote good lives and the common good. There are lots of threats. There are a lot of things that could go really badly. But there are also a lot of things that could go really well. And I just thought the discussion so far in Sydney, I've encountered so many young people, so many people of various religious faiths who think we've been preparing for this moment. Like, we've been thinking for quite a while as a human race about what gives human life dignity, about what it means to harness these kind of fundamental powers and discoveries for good. And now it's our turn to give it a shot. So I'm feeling pretty optimistic after my time in Sydney.
Well, that's good. I'm glad you're feeling optimistic. I would have to confess to being less so, but this is...
You're a doomer.
I think given, especially the way you painted the picture of statecraft
Yeah.
and other modern challenges, I think the combination of those things and this new technology does make me a little bit fearful. And including things like, and I want to ask you about this, the way it's looking like rupturing a whole lot of industries where people are going to no longer be needed in those jobs. I've got a 21-year-old and a 23-year-old.
Yeah.
They're both training in areas that could easily be wiped out by AI, in my estimations.
Yeah.
But we'll see. How do you sort of wrestle with that?
Right after I leave here this week, I'm flying to San Francisco, where we are leading a meeting with a bunch of religious leaders, so Catholic, evangelical pastors, rabbis, are meeting with economists and people who are involved with economic forecasting to basically have the forecasters show the religious folks, here's how bad the job market is about to get. Like, wake up, get ready, because there's a big tidal wave. Have you ever seen the movie Interstellar?
Yes.
You know, they get to that planet in Interstellar and they look off on the horizon and they see what they think is a mountain range. And like, oh, those are beautiful mountains. And then one of them realizes it's not a mountain range, it's a tidal wave. It's the biggest tidal wave they've ever seen and it's about to consume them. Mm-hmm. That's when I talk to the economists and the economic forecasters, they're the ones that see the tidal wave, and many people of faith, many people in these various social organizations that are not keyed into the economic data, they think they're looking at a mountain range. Yeah. And so the event that we're putting on in San Francisco next week is trying to wake up, especially the religious leaders, to say, you need to start thinking about how you are going to be a leader in your community when there are large segments of the economy that have been disrupted by this. And like, what does it mean when folks are losing their jobs? What does it mean when the tax base that pays for your schools and your roads has completely eroded? What does your tradition have to say about these issues? And our perspective is that this is a big opportunity for faith communities to step up and to advocate for the dignity of workers. I think we oftentimes assume that these economic transitions are inevitable, like the invisible hand, the tidal wave just comes in and there's nothing we could do about it and it rewrites our lives. The economy is a bunch of human beings making decisions. It is a human phenomenon. It's a human wave. And it's not the case that, a single one-off individual can stop a major economic transition from happening, but we absolutely can decide how we're going to respond to it. And one of the biggest questions I think that we're likely to face is, do we want to transition to a world that has widespread, sustained unemployment, but maybe folks receive universal basic income to continue to have some quality of life? Is that a just, good society? Is that an okay economy? Or if we think that there's going to be this massive transition led by AI, we now have to work double time to find meaningful new employment opportunities for the people who are going to be displaced.
Yes.
And the religious leaders that we're gathering are all of their traditions are of a mindset that it is really important to a good life that you have access to meaningful work. The way that you work is the way that you have a contribution to the broader civil society. It's the way that you matter and are seen and show up socially. So the idea that we're going to take a huge portion of the population and deprive them of that opportunity, that's a serious human rights level issue that we need to be speaking about. Likewise, some forms of work are humanizing. Some are deeply dehumanizing. And as we do this economic transition, the kind of work that we offer to people should be work that's befitting of human beings. We shouldn't just have people, sitting at home for 16 hours a day labeling data, like labeling images to train AIs and getting paid minimum wage. That is not a dignified economy. That's not good for anyone. So helping to articulate these goals and having these faith communities weigh in on these debates, we care very deeply about that. Also, exercising our imagination for all of the different kinds of work that people could be called to, and we shouldn't just naively assume that the types of jobs that we have in the early 2020s are the best possible jobs human beings could have. I mean, there are a lot of lousy jobs currently. There were terrible jobs in the 1800s. And one of the things that faith communities have also done a pretty good job with over the history of the modern world is stepping in and saying we could have a better economy than the one we currently have. In my tradition, I'm Roman Catholic. Famously, Pope Leo XIII in the late 1800s weighed in on the Industrial Revolution, and he said, look, Catholics, I'm going to clarify this for you. Labor unions are fine. Like, it's totally fine for people who find themselves now working in this newfangled factory system that we're still wrapping our heads around to express solidarity with each other and to ask for weekends off and to demand that children not be put to work in factories. And
it is,
we,
right?
you know, I think you would have thought in the mid 1800s that it was an inevitability that the world economy follow a certain path of industrialization. But in fact, it took a little while, but we prevailed. There are not 8-year-olds working in factories in the developed world, and that's a very good thing.
This is Life and Faith, and I'm speaking with Meghan Sullivan, who is a key figure in developing an ethical framework around AI. She has much to offer in terms of understanding what this technological revolution means and will mean for our lives. I'd previously heard her say that in the tech hubs like Silicon Valley, there is a hunger for faith-shaped wisdom among the people who are producing this tech. Now, that was surprising to me, so I asked Meghan why she thinks this is the case. Here she is.
You know, I'm surprised. We just finished doing a 2-year study with the Lilly Endowment in North America, where we went to Silicon Valley, we went to Boston, we went to some of these major tech cities, and we asked folks, are there Christians around here? And if so, where are they working? What are they thinking about this technology that's being built? And when we embarked on that project, I thought, we're going to get laughed out of town. They're going to be like, who are these yokels from South Bend, Indiana, trying to proselytize? But in fact, we went and we kind of put out our APB, and we discovered that there are a whole lot of people of faith that are quietly working in these large companies developing artificial intelligence, or who work around it, or venture capitalists that are funding it. And these are very thoughtful folks. They're typically college-educated people who read very deeply and who are just as curious about spiritual and philosophical questions as they are curious about engineering questions. Right. And they've got children, and they think quite a bit about what human flourishing looks like and whether or not their children are flourishing and whether or not their communities are doing well. And they're so busy and sometimes so typecast that nobody ever asks them what they think about these bigger existential questions. And when we showed up and we said, you know, we'd love to host you for a dinner, we'd love to have a bigger conversation about this, we were shocked at the number of people who turned up.
Now, let's talk about, therefore, because you think that the Christian church or Christian people, Christian thinkers, have a real contribution to make in this area. And in your study and in your centre there in, well, I'm going to say Notre Dame, how you would say it.
Notre Dame,
not Notre Dame. You have this sort of sense that we've got to set up this ethical framework. You ran through it very quickly a moment ago, but let's touch on each of those points very briefly. So tell us about the framework itself, and then let's run through how you're sort of setting this up.
So there are two assumptions I really want to challenge, and I'd invite your listeners to challenge next time they come up in conversation. One, I think a lot of religious people are afraid of AI. I certainly know a lot of religious people I encounter, and they think when this topic comes up, they just wish I could go down in a cave and forget about it. And a lot of non-religious people might still be afraid of AI, but also think that this big technological leap is going to be another nail in the coffin for the relevance of religion to society. Right. Because it's being driven by a sort of secular tech industry, and it's just going to further show that religion is pointless.
Yeah.
Both of these assumptions are just categorically false. One, religion, especially the kind of Abrahamic religions, the Jewish and Christian tradition, has never been more relevant to big public debates than it's about to be as we try to navigate what it is to live in a world with this powerful AI in it. Mm-hmm. And two, people who are part of these religious traditions need to stop being so timid and need to really roll up their sleeves and do that work of showing the broader relevance. So let's talk about the first claim. These faith communities, especially I'll speak about the Christian community because that's the one that's kind of close to my heart.
Yeah.
Christian social teaching has never been more relevant or interesting in our lifetimes. I mean, it's always been interesting if you're a part of the tradition, you believe that, but it's never been more interesting to a broad audience as it is now. Why is this? We discovered a few years ago in November 2022 when ChatGPT hit the mass market, we now have software on our phones that can engage in seemingly abstract conceptual reasoning. It can generate pictures and images that no human being has ever seen or thought of before. It can ask and answer scientific questions that no human mind has asked or answered before. If you used to think that what makes you special as a human being is your ability to think abstract thoughts, to solve problems, to create art, all answers, by the way, as a philosophy professor, I would have 100% accepted on a philosophy exam 5 years ago. If you think that's what makes human beings special, well, we have empirically falsified that assumption now, because as of November 2022, you have an app on your phone that can do all of those things and more. Not only can it do all those things, but it can do them better and faster and weirder than you could ever possibly do them.
And yet it's not human. That's
and
what you're
yet
gonna
it
say,
is
right?
not. I mean, there are some people who think now it's better than humans. Like this is another fringe thing happening in some of these tech hubs. But I think most of us can say, no, this is not a human. There's something actually very special about being a human. Yeah. There's something beautiful about when you look at your newborn child who can do none of those things, who solves zero abstract problems, but nevertheless has capacities and values and an inner life that make them infinitely more valuable than any piece of software. Now the question is popping up in your mind, like, what exactly is it that makes our lives so valuable? One option is like the nihilist option, just throw in the towel, like nothing. I'm out of ideas. Like, might as well just, hop on the iceberg and float off to oblivion. I think most of us now we're thinking about that question more seriously and looking like, what alternative answers do I have? Well, luckily, faith traditions have been thinking about this question for a long time. In the Christian tradition, we've been thinking about it for 3,000 years because the Jewish tradition thinks very, very seriously about this question. What does it mean for a human being to be made in the image and likeness of God? Like, what is that? It clearly isn't that we're good at solving problems. It's got to be something even more fundamental about like what it is to have a soul, what it is to have an inner life. Those questions are not easy to wrap your heads around, but you can't ignore them anymore because all the cheap answers have been taken off the table by AI. So one of the reasons why I think faith communities have a lot to offer, this is my philosophy part coming through, have a lot to offer is everybody and their brother's asking philosophical questions now that they weren't really staying up at night worrying about before because they didn't have to. I think that's a tremendous opportunity. But then maybe you don't like philosophy. My family hates philosophy. So like they weren't asking those questions 5 years ago and they kind of prefer not to ask them now. Even if you're not asking those really deep existential questions, there are a whole lot of practical questions that are coming about because this is disrupting our ways of life. I'm a teacher. I teach at a college. I used to think the main way that you teach and inspire students is you assign them essays and then they write them and then you give them comments.
Can't do that anymore.
Can't do that anymore. All of our assumptions about what it means to teach a younger human being how to think, out the window now. Yeah. So, okay, this is a big disruption. How do I get answers about like what's really like the essence of great teaching? Well, again, faith traditions have thousands of years of thinking about like what really goes on when you teach someone something. In the Christian tradition, one of the most important aspects of teaching is not just transferring information from one brain into another, but it's formation. It's this idea that you form someone's character and their soul, that we're constantly being formed, that we're not born formed morally, but it's something that happens to us in community. Well, gosh, maybe that's now the work of schools. It's not just the transferring of trivia or knowledge because, every human being is going to have access to AI. Yeah. But it's the human work of developing a character and a soul that can still happen in an educational context. And that's what we need to be doubling down on. That's a beautiful vision that you get from this religious tradition that helps answer these big questions we're asking now that our lives have been completely disrupted.
And would you say that dignity is the foundation of all those other things that flow from it that you think are relevant in this discussion? And dignity, what by that you mean every human being being made in the image of God. Is that what you're
Absolutely. So we are working on a big project, basically helping Christians and people of faith who work in the tech industry, people of faith that work at big research universities, helping them articulate what are the distinctive ideas that these faith traditions have to contribute to debates about artificial intelligence. And we've got this little acronym to remember, like the 5 big ones. You briefly mentioned this a second ago, but the acronym is DELTA.
Yes.
Dignity, embodiment, love, transcendence, and agency. And these are all 5 features of human life that is going to make our lives worth living, that's going to cause us to flourish in the era of AI. They're not features of great AI. I mean, so much of our conversation about AI ethics right now is thinking about what's going to make an AI really good, what will make an AI safe, what will make it explainable. And those are interesting questions. But we've lost the thread here a little bit, that the much more interesting question is, how are we going to thrive in this era? What does it mean to be a thriving human? And the DELTA acronym is meant to capture the 5 things that are going to be essential about a great human life in this era of powerful AI. And at the very core of this, you can't talk about the other 4 concepts unless you first grasp that human dignity is worth fighting for. Like, it's worth putting human beings at the center of the rest of our ethical investigation.
How confident are you that the excellent work that's going on at your university and others around the world in this area can impact the people who are actually making this tech? Like, are they going to care what goes on there? Like, how does that work?
You know, it's so funny, Simon. I was in California right before Christmas this year, and I was hosting a dinner to talk about these questions about what it means to be a flourishing human in the era of AI. And some wonderful folks had come out to have dinner with us and talk about it, and a very, very well-meaning participant at this dinner looks at me about halfway through and gives me this kind of pitying smile and just says, "You do know that there are only 300 to 400 people on planet Earth who matter right now, right?"
Right, in this production of this stuff.
Yeah, and they're the people who are either training or controlling the frontier models, or the political leaders who have the capacity to unplug them.
Yeah.
Everybody else, if you're not part of that 300 to 400, that's really cute. You've got
good luck.
You've got your ethics, you got your human dignity. Yeah, have fun. It's been nice having dinner with you. And I appreciated the honesty with which this person was willing to sort of confront us with this objection, but I disagree. I disagree on philosophical grounds, ethical grounds, and also disagree on practical grounds. Maybe we'll talk about the practical point first. AI is being developed by companies. Those companies require money to buy the computer chips and to train the models. It's not the case that they just appear. They require massive investments. In the U.S. alone, some projections are that $1 trillion of our economy is flowing into developing these products right now, which is just staggering. That dwarfs the space race and the race for nuclear weapons. I mean, that's really staggering. That money comes from users. In a capitalist system, these companies make money because we download their products and we apply them to questions that affect our daily lives. And we do have a choice of which model we're going to use, which company we're going to back, how much of our mind share we're going to give it. It's not just the 300 to 400 makers who matter. If you're actually head of the commercial side of any of these companies, you are paying really close attention to the preferences and tastes of your potential user base, because otherwise you have no company. So it's nice for some of these developers to tell us that we're powerless, but as potential users and consumers of these products, we actually, maybe not as individuals, but as communities and groups, we have a lot of power. We can choose to say we will not work with your company. We don't like the way that your products are affecting adolescents in our community, so we're going to ban them from our schools. We're going to set age restrictions. I know Australia has been thinking very seriously about this. We actually have surprising amounts of agency as voters and consumers, and it's in these companies' interest to tell us that we don't have that power, but we do, and we've got to remember that. So practically, I think they're just incorrect. We all matter, and we can vote with our pocketbooks. Philosophically, and I say this as a Christian, I do not believe in this logic that whoever has the money makes the rules. That at the end of the day, the strong will do what they will and the weak will suffer what they must, to quote Thucydides. But if you've got all the computer chips, suddenly you decide the fate of the rest of the world. One of the core ideas in my religious tradition is that there's the manifest forms of power. There's like the Roman army, which seems really powerful. There's OpenAI, which seems really powerful. And then there's actual power, which oftentimes is really different than the manifest power. So in the Christian tradition, actual power is going to be God, who weirdly appears in the form of like a baby born in a barn. And that's like real power. And you don't notice it at the time because you're so focused on the manifest power, but like the real power could be right in front of your eyes and you'd miss it. And I always think that that kind of real powers at work, like the universe, God has a great sense of humor, and somebody who feels really powerful or manifests a lot of power in one moment, blink and they're going to be at the bottom. Like it turns on a dime. And so, somebody who tells you that a certain kind of manifest power structure is inevitable, if you're part of my religious tradition, you think, yeah, the Romans thought that. How did that work out for them?
It's interesting to me that not just your philosophy, but your belief system helps you, in this case, to approach this subject with energy and focus and optimism that you might not have otherwise. Now, you were quite a late convert, weren't you, to your faith? Did that come through the study of philosophy at some degree? Like, how did that happen?
I think it actually happened despite my study of philosophy. So I converted to my Christian faith as a college student. And as I mentioned, I'm Roman Catholic. So one of the interesting things about the Catholic Church is when you start the conversion, then they immediately stick you in a year-long class to make sure that it
taken
sticks.
Seriously.
Exactly. So I was a sophomore in college. It was the first anniversary of September 11th. So it was September 11th, 2002. I had a very profound faith experience. Some people, it happens gradually. In my case, at least there is like, I've got an anniversary that I can celebrate. I'd been feeling a kind of heaviness for the whole previous year. I just moved away from my family. I'd gone away to college. I was starting to wrestle with what I now realize are big existential questions, but at the time I didn't have that language for it. But just thinking like, what am I? What am I here for? Like, what do I hope for? I remember thinking about that quite a bit. And as a young woman, I hoped to get a great job and to have a beautiful family and to live in a big city. Those were kind of the three big things that were like the summum bonum of my life. And the 9/11 attacks happened, and at the time it didn't, I was so naive and young. I'd never been to New York City. I didn't actually, worry too much about them. It was just kind of this big world event that had happened. But by the time I hit the first anniversary of that, by the time I hit my second year of college, that morning, I'd read a news story about children who'd lost both parents in the World Trade Center. It hit me like a ton of bricks. Like, you could be doing everything right. You could be a lawyer working in New York City with this beautiful family, and then some psychopath with an airplane decides to murder you. And, like, this is the logic of the world that we live in. Like, it's not the case that you do everything right and then you live happily ever after. Like, sometimes you do everything right and you get killed by an airplane. Yeah. And that just became the kind of, like, crystallization of all of the heaviness and worries that I'd been entertaining for the previous year. So I've been kind of side-eyeing this Catholic church near the dorm that I was living in, and I'd been curious about it for a while. And I remember thinking, who's going to say something profound today about this anniversary? It's going to be the Christians. Like, this is basically what they do, is give speeches on the anniversary of, existentially tragic events. And I was like, I want to be in the audience. I remember the distinct thought. I was like, I want to be in the audience when the speech happens tonight.
Interesting.
So I looked up the mass time, went over to that church. And of course, there was no great speech about 9/11. It was like 4 old ladies, a Dominican priest, some readings from the Bible, a kind of quick communion and worship and prayer service that had zero to do with September 11. And I remember sitting in the back pew. I had the wherewithal to not like eat or drink anything, but just, had this profound experience of like, I didn't know this is what I'm looking for, but this space is filled with something that's the answer to the question that I am seeking. And I looked at these old ladies who are praying so reverently. And, to quote the great movie Harry Met Sally, like, I want what they're having. Like whatever they've got is the thing that I want. Like I don't know how to tune into that frequency, but I know that not only am I capable of doing it, but this is like what I am meant to be doing. So I started going back weekly to the scene of the crime on Wednesdays to that 5:30 mass. And if you're a 19-year-old woman who shows up at weekday mass, the Dominicans are going to get their claws in you eventually. And so they ambushed me like after 3 weeks of this, and they're like, is there something troubling you? What's going on? And I kind of shared with them somewhat less articulately what I was feeling. And they're like, oh, well, you should come on Sundays. Like that's when the main event happens. And, it was one of these things. I was becoming a philosophy major at that point, but I took 0 classes on philosophy of religion or theology. It was such a personal experience for me to be in that church praying with those people. And I was actually nervous about talking to any of my philosophy professors about it because I did not want to get any hard questions about the problem of evil or the ontological argument. I didn't want it to be intellectual. I wanted it to very much be like this personal relationship with God that is not threatened or interrogated from the outside. And so I kept it actually a secret until I was received into the church at Easter in my 3rd year of college because I had to take that class. The Dominicans make you take the class. And then as an adult, you come in at this huge 4-hour Easter service. And I didn't even tell my family I was doing it till like 3 weeks before. And it was a big shocker. They were mostly happy for me and kind of weirded out. But that's what brought me in. And then it was really, I was well into my PhD in philosophy and had a really wonderful mentor who was also a Christian. That was the phase of my life when I started feeling confident that I could do philosophy about this. Because before that, it felt like trying to do philosophy about loving your own mother or something. Like it was just like
couldn't see the connection.
I couldn't see the connection, and I was scared. I was scared of looking foolish, scared of not having like smart answers to defend my faith. And I had to get over a lot of that baggage, and I had to grow my confidence that this relationship was real, which took a minute, but it's been absolutely wonderful. I could go on and on about this. I'm a college professor now. I have been for the last 20 years, or I've been on that track. I've been in grad school or teaching. And I think a lot of folks look at 18-year-olds and 19-year-olds and they think, they're so shallow, they're materialistic, I can't believe I've got to talk to them. And one of the things that I remind myself of every semester is that under the hood of these young people, oftentimes the exact same kind of like storm is brewing inside of them. And I feel so lucky that those Dominicans grabbed me and that people were willing to kind of meet me on this and help pull out that spiritual life that was brewing inside of me. Thank God people took me seriously because it absolutely changed my life. And there are so many young people who are going through that right now. And I like to think that a great philosophy teacher, minister, parent can draw that out of them and change their lives as well.
This has been Life and Faith with me, Simon Smart. Thanks to Professor Meghan Sullivan for coming into the studio. She was visiting Australia with the University of Notre Dame, Australia, and we thank them for giving us some time with Meghan. I recommend checking out her work and books she's written. I'll put some links in the show notes to all of that. Thanks, as always, to our producer, Alan Douthwaite, and thank you for listening. Next time.
A lot of my mates have actually said to me, what's going on, Benny? We should be surfing and doing fun stuff in retirement, and you're diving into this. But equally, a lot of friends of mine have said that they would love to do it. Not necessarily paramedicine, but just a complete change and shift in doing something new. So I'd say, yeah, just do it.